Hello.
Hey.
This is Biweeklycast. It's episode number 58. Hosts are here. I'm Dima Malenko.
I'm Slava, and today we're going to talk about a number of things. But before we do...
The title in the notes is very intriguing, like micro stories. Let's go into that.
Before we go into that, we should go through the follow-up. And surprise, surprise, I have a follow-up point today.
Yay, that's a huge win. Wait, what happened with my computer over here? So tell us.
I think it was the last episode when I was telling about the science fiction book that I was reading, named Expeditionary Force. It's not a book, it's a series of books. And for some reason, I decided that it was Scalzi's book, but it's not. The actual author is Craig Allenson. So my bad. I think our follow-up is quite often the correction of our slips and fails. So here I come.
Right.
I did misguide you.
Can you remind us again, was it a good book? Do you recommend it to folks?
Yeah, I enjoy it. And one of the best thing that it's a series of something like 18 audiobooks at Audible. And right now I'm in the mood when I don't want to pick something new, and having a series with the same narrator of the same world that goes on and on is quite enjoyable. Like I'm at book 4 right now, and I'm not going to stop anytime soon.
Nice. Cool. Thanks for recommendation. Sounds good.
There are a few more follow-up points there.
Yeah, there are a few follow-up points for me. And I think it's probably one point, even though there are two links that I added to follow up. The point is probably one. Remember how last time we discussed the report on research done by Aspen Institute about third and second order effects of AI, and how we kind of complained a little bit that research was maybe not as deep as we would have hoped, and something like that. And we also discussed that we kind of discovered that late before the recording, so it was not, well, at least I discovered this late before the recording. There was no time to change that. But let me take the blame for everything. If I knew about this earlier, there might have been an opportunity to do a little bit of research and see what other materials on the similar topic are out there, and maybe choose something else to discuss. And lo and behold, kind of half accidentally, I discovered that there are two other researches that were published recently about the AI, and like they try to prognosticate like what AI is going to bring us. One is called AI 2027, where they did almost exactly, I haven't gone through this kind of very thoroughly yet. It's on my to-do list, but they did what you suggested to do. Like, yeah, can we go through scenario planning kind of a thing? And they went through that and tried to predict when and which kinds of technologies or kind of breakthroughs might be coming, and what can be effects of those things, and how it may or may not bring AI doom or whatever it might be by 2027, which is, it also is done very nicely visually. You kind of scroll through the timeline to get the story. I highly recommend people interested in that to check out. And also there is another research that was published recently, which is called AI as Normal Technology. The idea there is that now everyone says like, no, AI is so different. It's vastly different than anything else that happened before in terms of technological breakthroughs. And the authors that take a lens like, what if we assume that AI is going to be like any other technology breakthrough before that, like internet, like, I don't know, horseless carriages or something along those lines, and analyze prospects and what AI might be from that perspective, which is also quite interesting. I have not gone through all of it yet, but at any rate, from what I've seen and what I heard in discussions about these materials, they seem to be decent. If you're interested, definitely check them out.
Do you think it could be another book club for us, or we've tabooed the topic?
Right. I was worried, like we tabooed the topic last time, and here we're talking about that again. Maybe if something interesting, unexpected, big happens, maybe we will revisit it. I don't know. Or we can treat it as just any other piece of technology like note-taking apps and planning accessories, notebooks and pens, and talk about it in due course.
All right, that would be it about the follow-up. And before we jump to the topic, there is a
We
theme
usually
corner.
do theme corners, and you probably have some updates for us about your themes.
My theme currently is the sprint of connection, and I think it's going quite well, maybe even a bit too well. I could use the summer of disconnection after it. But things I was aiming to do, like I did reach out to people I wanted to reach out, I did get more engagement in the communities I want to engage in, and even some that I didn't mean to engage, and it still happened. All in all, it feels as if moving to the house helped a lot, because now when I have this yard and spot for barbecue and a nice terrace around, it's easier to invite people, and that also brought me like an occasion to reconnect with some of the people. So this sprint is going quite successfully. I'm already satisfied with the results, and I think I will keep doing the sprint just because I intended to do the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
But chances are this is going to be my last seasonal theme this year.
Interesting.
I've noticed that seasonal theme, especially this one, kind of distracted me from the yearly theme. And that's something I never intended to do. That's something that happened. So the seasonal theme became the main theme, and the yearly theme and the triennial that I was doing got way less attention. So for the next half a year, I'm going to focus on the yearly theme.
No, this is very, very interesting. Why do you think that is? Is it that you maybe chose the seasonal themes that are slightly less connected to yearly or triennial, and they
It has
overshadowed?
an indirect impact and connection to the others, but it requires way more time. And it seems that I'm losing focus instead of gaining focus. And that's where probably it's a good idea to stop, because previously my themes were just the sub steps to the bigger theme. And in this case, it's something I also needed, but it was not helping. Moreover, it was distracting me from the previous one. I've noticed this conflict, and I think that instead of getting back to the seasonal theme and trying to fix it, I'd rather give up seasonal themes for a little while and leave with the year one.
Yeah, that also is I guess a lesson or slash discovery about how themes work. Also, you mentioned that moving houses helped you. It sounds so corporate speaky, like make progress towards your goal, which is not, I don't think is appropriate for this for this situation. But nonetheless, it helped you kind of do more in terms of connecting with other people. And our friend, well, our virtual friend Ray, is also a big fan of kind of physical manifestations of kind of different, having different places for doing different things. How, in your experience, how, what kind of role did it play? Like, would you be able to connect on the same level with the same amount of people if you haven't moved houses? Like, how do you, what was the importance of moving house in this theme for you?
Well, firstly, it's an occasion. Like, I moved to a new house and now I can say, well, would you like to come and visit, like for a little tour? And most people say, yes, of course. And this yard and barbecue is also quite helpful since it's getting warmer and people feel like staying outdoors. Most of my friends are the apartment based families who stay in most of the time. And if they go out, they have to go to a park or somewhere, drive somewhere really, really far. Since we basically live 20 minutes from the downtown, it's a relatively short drive. It's comfy. And I think that this is the main factor that helps. Plus, having the entire ground floor or first floor just for social events without getting people into your bedroom or into your office or into your space, and still having enough space to accommodate like a dozen of people without any issues is very helpful.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, and I think it may be different for different people. Some may be a little bit more open slash extroverted. I don't know, but yeah, I'd be uncomfortable welcoming people in my bedroom or even in my office. So it's great to have a space for public gatherings.
Public gathering sounds a bit overwhelming, but a friendly party would be way more accurate.
Yeah. Parties. I didn't manage to turn off my kind of corporate speak thing as a
No, just my
gathering.
imagination is illustrating a public gathering in a living room. And like, nope, that's not what I meant.
We can ask AI, imagine a public gathering in the living room. Maybe we should do it, and that can be kind of thumbnail for the episode. Sounds good. Yep, thanks. I think those are interesting observations that you make on the path to your team, and thanks for sharing them with us.
I think the last final thought would be here that notes is very helpful. And in this case, I noticed the change by retrospectively looking through my notes for a few weeks. I realized that I'm not taking notes on the other themes, and that was an indicator that I haven't moved towards them in a while. So I'm not sure whether I recommend Theme System Journal or any other journal, but journaling in general rules.
Yeah, if there's anything a lot of people can agree on is that journaling helps.
All right. So from the follow-up and theme corner, we can actually move to the topic, but there's no the topic. There are topics. And I was thinking about something big that we could discuss for at least 20 minutes, and I couldn't think of anything. That's why I come up with 3 reasoned points that happened to me. And I think each of them is slightly curious and particularly interesting, but not for an entire episode. So I think we could go through 3 of those. One is the case study practice. The other is my experience of making a card game. And the third one is strategic sessions for military units that I was running.
That sounds intriguing and interesting.
So let's go from the first one, the case study. About 2 weeks ago, I ran a workshop for a huge telecom business for their C-level team. And since they were quite advanced, we decided not to go through the usual flow, but to run it in a case study format. They read a few books and some materials that I've asked them. Then we did a little Q&A to check how we understand things and what questions we have left. And then we looked at 2 cases, one international and one Ukrainian, of implementation of OKRs. And that was interesting because I get to see people from in educational context when I explain stuff. But in this specific context, these people know way more about management than I do. But I do know cases, like I've seen how this is integrated in companies, and I know the peculiarities, the risks, the pitfalls, and everything. And case study is the perfect format for that, for experiential learning rather than theoretical or conceptual. And it was fun to work with, but what I realized in the process is that many people interpret case study very differently. And I wanted to ask you, if you think about the word case study, what comes first to your mind?
You know, as you were speaking, my first question was going to be like, can we define what we mean by case study in this case? I think absent other inputs, I'd say first that I think the context in which I'm sort of slightly familiar with case studies is that kind of in business schools, they use case study as a method of learning or something like that, and which I understand, it is in my experiences, was that there was a description of a particular story or event. Typically that would be something that either prepared specifically for the occasion or close to that, and we ensure that all of the participants read the same thing, read the same materials, which we then discuss and walk through and project onto the experiences of the group and hopefully draw some useful conclusions.
And there are a few answers to this question out there in the world. Some of them are more academic, some of them are more practical and day-to-day use. But what they all have in common is that there is a first context sharing section that could be used in reading, in discussing, in presentations, in interviews, or whatever. And then there is a reflection section when people think about the experience they've seen and try to adjust it, learn some lessons from it, and see what went right, what went wrong, what could have been done differently, etc. And when it is contextualized to a specific team, group, company, or organization, that's helpful because our mind works on examples. Like it's hard for us to talk about goal setting in vacuum, but it's way easier to talk about goal setting in a specific team from a specific industry that did it in a specific time slot.
I would maybe take exception to that and say, like, sometimes, like, having an abstract discussion about nothing can also be relatively easily done. The other question is that there is no use or point in having this discussion other than
You don't
spending.
discuss the same subject. You just discuss different
Isn't this
perspectives or angles.
part of the fun?
No, but
I agree.
I mean, somebody can find fun there, but
for productive discussion with useful outcomes, yes.
So I was so inspired by this thing that I decided to suggest this format to a new, freshly launched OKR UA community. It comes from the public sector, a few people who are enthusiasts of objectives and key results and advocate this method for goal setting in ministries and other public sector bodies, suggested that we should try. And I prepared 2 cases for this live event. Normally, you would send things to read, but given that people are not very familiar with case study, we decided that we will just make a few short descriptions of Ukrainian lab, CSD, and NACP. It's Ukrainian anti-corruption agency. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 stories. They basically consisted from the context, how did the idea of objectives and key results implementation happen, a brief history of implementation, like what were the stages, what was happening, what were the ups and downs in this process, some details and nuances people should consider, and a few examples, like what were the first iterations of OKRs and what were the latest iterations of OKRs in these organizations. And then there was a checklist of questions to go through with the group. Mm-hmm. So people would read these 1-pagers or 2-pagers, depending on the size of the organization, and then they would spend half an hour discussing it with these reflective guided questions.
So how did it go?
I did like it. I think that listening to the reflection afterwards, like firstly, it was quite a big meeting, like 40 people. Mm-hmm. You can't do a nice workshop for, mm-hmm. I mean, you can do, but it's way harder to do a workshop for a bigger group of people because there is quite often the very limited time for feedback. Like you can't hear out pretty much everyone. And since the case study is mostly focused on the group work and they don't communicate a lot to the open group, it was really nice to hear at the end, like we did get last 10 minutes for the round of reflection where everyone had to shape one lesson learned from the case study, and most of them were different and they were meaningful. And usually the quality of the post-activity reflection illustrates how things went for me. And I was really happy with the quality of the feedback and things, how these guys digested the experience.
Yeah, that sounds great. So what did you learn from this whole exercise? What was the learning?
I think that we are so used to some academic standard thing, like with slides, with presentations, with explaining things before asking people to do something, that we forget that most people have some previous experience and they can look through the lens of this experience into a situation and bring something valuable. And there is not always a need for an expert who will interpret some experiences of information. And if you get the quality people into the room and give them some time to discuss the same subject, it might be very, very effective, both in terms of learning and in terms of community development, because the people who were working for an hour and a half in the same group, they did build some trust and got to know each other without some artificial team building, ice breaking, warming up activities that are fake. Like they did learn about each other in the process of discovering together.
Would you also say that this format gives a little bit more tools to the facilitator or facilitators of the session, in a sense that since we are starting with a case study, so we're starting with a specific case, it forces kind of specifics, right? Not flying somewhere high in a very abstract matters. We kind of ground ourselves in something specific, but also thanks to this thing being specific in discussions, some people might have a desire or inclination to veer towards, once again, more abstract things or things only tangentially related, because we know that we have a specific topics. It's ever so slightly easier for a facilitator to bring the conversation back to the primary topic and things like that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. here. On the other hand, it does take a lot of time to prepare and quite an effort because materials for case study are custom made. And sometimes you have to interview someone, you have to write longer texts and operate with lots of information to then focus on something very, very specific. And another new skill that I discovered was this kind of questions that have to guide this discovery. Because depending on what you write on this task list, the conversation could go very different directions. Like you could discuss the culture, the process, the mistakes, the risks, and so on and so forth. In the limited amount of time, people can't get very deep into the case. Like they don't have a full day to discover the edges. And shaping up these questions is quite a challenge.
Yeah, and here, like, this is a very good point that you're making. And from my understanding, I think I remember reading something about this, and now I'm assuming a role of hallucinating AI or something like that, is that the part of value / appeal of good business schools is that they have those case study carefully crafted over long periods of time, and a lot of kind of investment went into developing the case study itself, and this is why they command such a high prices for those MBA or like similar.
Yeah, it seems like if you do it professionally, it's a high production product. Like you have to invest a lot into the prep. I think about the micro experience, how it could be used in the future. For instance, in the e-learning products of Savvy, we could introduce a case study as like having a recording of a conversation and then reflecting on how it went or what lessons can be learned from there, being more experiential rather than theoretical and conceptual in terms of learning. Like imagine a feedback workshop where you don't actually explain the models of feedback, you just showcase 5 conversations and then ask people to say which one seemed to be more this type or that type, more helpful, less helpful, more trustful, less trustful, more effective, less effective, and why.
And then you can dramatize those recordings and say, to fire or not to fire, and so on and so forth, and ask people to reflect. Huh? Wouldn't that be cool?
It wouldn't, but I guess that could illustrate the end of this first micro story, and we could move on to the second one.
So that's a good one. Okay, what's the second one?
A friend of mine reached out and asked to help with the design of a card game. It's one of the games where you pick the card, you see the question, you either answer the question or you ask this question to the group, and then something happens. I've played a few games like that are just party games, like they basically just to get to know people from unexpected different angles. They could come like, what if? And a set of what if questions, or something about have you ever, and then a number of have you ever questions that go into very different areas of experience. And lately, I've spotted a tendency that this kind of activity is getting more and more popular in business. Like people start bringing in the same dynamic into like, let's discuss our marketing strategy. Or let's think about, I don't know, I do have a set in the next room that I bought for our team to test it out. But I've totally seen like a trend in the market of people reflecting on some questions with the help of questions. And like these two things matched. Like my friend asked me for help. I've seen the tendency. I said, why don't we try? Have you ever had experience with anything like that?
Yeah. Yes, I think that it was more of a fun kind of recreational activity. I think like hard Cards Against Humanity is an example of this kind of thing. So we do have a set over here, so, and we play quote unquote occasionally. It's fun.
Like I'm looking right now at the website of the creator of people who created the game that I bought. They have 6 sets. It's personal brand, company brand, strategy, 50 innovations for your business, 30 ways to make more money. I think they are more provocative rather than structural. Like they will not make a strategy or they will not build up your brand for you, but they could definitely highlight some of the blind spots that your team might have and give you a chance to reflect on some things that you probably haven't thought about. They claim that these sets are based on experience of workshops and strategic sessions and some provocative questions that help people progress, but I doubt that.
Everyone would say that it's based on research, Asian medicine, and whatever else, like signal from the space.
So I started working on this the old school way, like I took a page, started writing some subtopics, then I took the whiteboard, I started shaping the questions there, and it was going so painfully and slowly. Like I was investing a few hours just trying to understand the sub-directions of the questions, and then lots of time doing that. So what I did later, I just took a picture of my whiteboard and fed it to GPT. GPT suggested 250 questions, out of which I excluded 220. But those 30 that seemed fine, I recalibrated and reformulated, and it helped me so much because I would stumble on the words, but when I saw the wrong option created by GPT, it felt very intuitively and easier just to correct it and edit. So I'm way better editor than writer. And when it had enough input from my side to at least go the right direction, but still fuck up, and I could correct the slips and the issues, it definitely was way smoother. So the final section took me maybe 45 minutes. And I did have these 4 sets of 30 questions. And I'm kind of excited about the way it went. Like, I really like the questions and how they ended up looking. So I even considered trying them with some of my teams, seeing if it could help us.
Well, I didn't anticipate from the notes you put in our doc. I didn't anticipate the AI angle on this, and was maybe slightly hoping that you would go the direction of like, why is it that these kinds of games getting more popular? What might be in them? But yeah, it's interesting.
It had to happen, don't you think?
Yep.
I know you haven't asked me, but I would still like to test out a few questions on you right now. So let's say we have 4 categories. It's communication, decision-making, roles and responsibility, and motivation.
So you need to pick a category first.
Yes, please.
Like motivation.
Motivation. So there are 30 questions in the list, and they are numbered from 1 to 30. Would you pick out 3 random, like one by one? You'll just tell a number, and I'll give you a question.
It would be 2, 17.
Okay, let's go for 2.
Okay.
What kind of task or work would you do without compensation or payment? Something out of your scope that you do these days. What would you just do for free?
I understand the scope of question. It's like my work duties and work settings, which I would do for free, coming into someone else's office to get the same. Maybe like I would do a little bit of mentoring for someone for free.
Let's go to the second one.
Okay, I think I'm playing it wrong. I'm already losing. I feel
that's fine. That's fine. You haven't lost
17.
Yet. 17. Man, you're very like there are 3 questions about money, and you've picked 2 of them already.
Let's see if I can pick third.
What's my attitude to money as a source of motivation?
It's okay.
I mean, is it workable? Like, how exactly does it work as a motivator?
But it does, because if you absence of money can be as good of a motivator as anything else, right? If you have to put something on the table for your family and stuff like that, and love it or not, in the modern world, you've got to have money for that kind of most of the time. So if you are not getting any money for what you are doing, you probably would seek to do something else somewhere else that would give you money. But at the same time, I also think that there is maybe sort of law of diminishing returns, where kind of getting more money does not necessarily make you more motivated per se, but maybe it's nonetheless can still shift your, with the same level of motivation, maybe to higher plane of ambition, and kind of allow you to do more things, or kind of maybe try more risky endeavors or something like that.
Well, these questions compensate on the first one. It does qualify as the answer. Let's move to the third one.
Okay, the third one would be 29.
29. Where is the
money?
In Ukrainian, mazha, would you say like the edge boundary between the responsibility for the others and respecting their own right to make mistakes and make their choices.
Well, it is, I guess, it is where you draw it. You don't know in each individual interaction, you would not necessarily know where it is up front, and you sort of need to probe for that if you are kind of the initiator of interaction or something like that. You kind of try something, maybe go a bit over the board, maybe being too directional or too paternalistic or like whatever it might be, and then you observe and say like, oh no, like that made the other person uncomfortable, maybe I should scale that back. Or maybe you try something very soft and it has no effect, and then you say no, like that we need to change something. And I think the opposite thing is also valid. It takes two to dance. So all of us are responsible for establishing and maintaining those boundaries for ourselves. So it's very A, there is nothing bad, and B, there is a lot of good to say that like, no, I don't like it, please don't do it. Or yeah, this was helpful, kind of, yeah, next time you see me doing something wrong, I'd appreciate your feedback or flagging to me that I'm doing something.
All right, congratulations, you won.
Right.
At least you got into the spirit of the game.
I'm relieved.
Let's just to balance it out, you could pick a question for me to answer. Once again, 4 categories: communication, decision-making, roles, and motivation.
Let's stick with motivation.
Motivation.
And number 9.
Number 9. What are my personal values that are related to my job? How are my personal values connected? And I think that in my specific case, my values dictate my job, since like I started this business because of my values, and I'm guiding the company the way I believe works best even for me. And I even have those values noted down. Quote that reasonable wisdom, impactful service, fair collaboration, and fundamental care. These are my 4 personal values that are currently in my mind. And I think that reasonable wisdom is the essence of Savvy Products. Impactful service is the manner we work. Fair collaboration is my corporate culture approach, the way I try to facilitate. And fundamental care is more of a personal thing. So I think it doesn't have the reflection at work. It does in some domains, but not fully.
This is great.
And I believe now you can imagine how, like, if team does this together, it could help them understand each other better in terms of motivation and what drives them.
Do you think that the slightly random nature of this thing, when you didn't give me a question, like you didn't say, oh, I have a set of questions here, let me ask you this. You told me like, choose the category, then say that number at random. And this is what happens with cards, right? When you have the physical cards and you have to pick one, it is random, right? And I think it induces a little bit extra honesty, if you will, because it's just a universe speaks to you through this question, like speak to the universe back, as opposed if there is a facilitator.
You don't suspect that there is someone's plan that you're falling into.
Right, yeah. You would second guess, like, what are they leading towards? Like, what's the meaning? Like, what's the right question? And here's like, there's no right question. It's just a question that came out of ether, but let's roll with it.
Moreover, you could go different ways. You could pick the card to ask someone. You could pick a card that you wouldn't to answer. You could pick a card that everyone answers in circles. So it works in many different ways.
But it kind of shakes things up a little bit to release that extra bit of energy, honesty, or whatever. Openness would be the right word.
Well, that's one of the purposes, is to shake things up. And I believe that most of these questions that I created, they are to build better relationship and trust within the team. And the one that I bought are more professional. They are to highlight some of the blind spots and bring the fresh perspective on a specific business process.
Nice. Are you going to create kind of a set, like proper set of cards printed?
It's going to be a collaboration. Like, my friend is going to design them, market them, and Seve will be just branded there that we are to blame for their own questions. So that was the micro story 2. And now the micro story 3 is about the strategic sessions for military units. Somehow, in the past 2 months, I did facilitate 3 strategic sessions for different military units, and I was startled with the way they resemble civil ones. Like very similar requests, like we need to understand who we are. We want to know what to do and what not to do. We would like to focus, like we would like to minimize our weaknesses and maximize our strengths. We would like to expand, but don't know where exactly and what is the end state of this expansion. I hear these questions on weekly basis from different businesses. And to my surprise, I didn't expect them to happen in the military context, in the context of the army. Because in my simplified understanding, the strategy, especially at the level of the unit, is not something they needed, because the strategy would be dictated by the higher ranking officers and sometimes described by your code or some other docs that have to guide you all the way through. But I think that Ukrainian military in this specific context is quite special, because there are too many people from business and from out of military that joined the army. And today they kind of create this need for extra sense at the level of specific units that was not there before, which is amazing, I think.
It is.
It is. If I told you that I'm going to run a strategic session for a team, let's say they are educational direction, and I would put their SWOT analysis as one activity, vision exercise to see what kind of unit they would like to become in the future, and OKR activity to set the objectives and the key results in the process. Would you think that some of these things wouldn't be relevant or wouldn't work or seem like too much business focused or too business context fixed?
Maybe not necessarily. Now, in your intro, I think it is fascinating how you described that, like similar kinds of challenges people encounter in very lines of work that you would think are vastly different. And I think, like, of course, hindsight and retrospect is great. Like hindsight is always 2020, as they say, and it might be easier to construct explanation for why that might be rather than predicted ahead of time. But one thing in common between the two areas could be that, like we are dealing with groups of people doing something together, and there are other groups of people nearby doing maybe similar or adjacent things also together. And it may be only natural to expect that like some aspects of dynamics there would be similar, just from the sheer fact that we are talking about groups of people doing stuff. And circling back to your question, if OKRs, SWOT, and stuff like that would be maybe too businessy for this different context of military units, I don't think so. The only thing might be is that the actual terminology like SWOT or OKRs, that it has its roots in the business and it comes with that connotation. It sounds businessy. If we replace them with more general, more generic terms, I think it should still apply. I would not see a reason why.
That's exactly what happened. And I learned this lesson the hard way during the first session. I realized that the terminology doesn't work. So for the second and third, for SWOT, we were dealing with impact factors. Like they know what impact is. They analyze impact factors quite intensely. So they are very familiar with the thing. The only thing that is different that they usually analyze it on their subunit or their team. And they never did it on the level of the bigger body. And I asked them to do it for their unit and for the unit they're part of. Like, for example, if they're a battalion, like what would be the brigade impact factors to understand the bigger picture. For the vision activity, the word vision is very businessy, but military people have the term end state, and it worked perfectly fine. Like I asked them to describe the end state in 3 years for their unit, and they did describe it quite colorfully and with details.
That's cool. I'll borrow this because I think in some of the circles I'm in, the word vision became a little bit kind of toxic. End state might be good. Like North Star is like halfway there. People still kind of resonate with North Star. Maybe end state is even better because it forces you to be kind of practical, like describe the actual things.
For the objectives and key results, we substituted objectives, because objective is misleading in this case, into tracks of development. Like, what are the development tracks or transformation tracks we should take to get to our end state? And then the key results remain the same because they are quite specific and illustrative. But generally, I'm really excited about the way it went. And from the feedback from these guys, I can hear that they feel way more connected to what they're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And they got to hear each other for the first time in months, because they don't really spend way much time discussing who they are, where they would like to go, and what's the best way to do it on the macro level. And they're very deep in the routines that they have to perform. Plus, there are too many external factors that try to influence their identity and the development vectors and tracks. And it was super valuable for them to spend time together. Plus, they invited some of the key partners from volunteering areas that also added some new perspectives for them.
This is great. And I think that this is also a great example of how we sort of should not cling to specific terminology kind of too much and be too dogmatic or too kind of religious about it. I also sometimes see this in professional setting where people would have idea that we need to do X, Y, like we need to. Sorry, I'm failing to come up with a specific example, but use kind of domain specific or even team specific jargon to say that we need to do X without realizing that X in broader context might have different meanings. And it creates a lot of opportunity for miscommunication, for lack of a better word. And it is always so useful. And that this is what I generally try to do, is to kind of describe this thing. Like, we want to be successful, can we describe what be successful mean? And so we want that 80% of our sales go there, or something along those lines. Kind of be more
Could you be more specific?
Right, kind of decipher what you mean by that, and that helps people, I hope, to kind of resonate and understand what you're saying better. And I think similar to your example, when we say objective in business world, objective is one thing. It's just like an abstract thing, like maybe it's a goal in this item in a spreadsheet. It has kind of status on it, like on track, behind, or at risk, whatever it might be. For folks in the military, objective has very definite and specific, and most of all, different sense. And that they would not, if you keep insisting on what was the objective, they would, I would imagine they would not understand what you want of them. But if you explain what you mean by objective instead, without using the word objective, they say, oh, you mean this. Yeah, this is how it works for our system.
One of my personal conclusions here is that if you're running a discussion in the context that you're used to, imagine you're inviting a few people out of this context to join this discussion. Would you do it in the same way? Would you still use the same terms, the same activities, the same charts, or you would do it slightly differently? And if you would do it, if you did it slightly differently, what exactly would you change? Risk areas. And as a side effect, it kind of impacted my business strategic sessions. I gave up some of the terms, some of the slang. I don't insist on many things that I insisted previously. All right, you don't want to do that. Let's find another way around. You don't want to do the vision. Let's talk about your motivation and dreams.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. A lot of good learnings from a lot of different stories.
Yeah, so these were 3 micro stories, and we could call it a week.
A good week.
Hopefully good weeks. Yeah.
Good weeks.